The room remembers more than I do. It keeps the shape of what happened, even after the years thin the edges. The light is low, filtered through a window that no one bothered to clean. Dust hangs where motion used to be. The floor still knows where a chair once scraped, where someone stood too long. Time stalled here, not stopped, paused, waiting. I step inside as if sound might disturb it, as if the air itself could object to being touched again. This was never sealed properly. It was simply forgotten. And that, more than anything, is what stayed with me. Maryland, late spring of 1996. The address is ordinary enough that it almost feels like an error. A small rental near a bus line, vinyl siding. A mailbox replaced twice since then. Back then, it belonged to Lila Moreno, 27, graduate student, evening receptionist at a medical office. She kept lists in careful handwriting and pressed flowers between pages of books she never finished. She believed in routines because they made days easier to survive. Nothing about her life suggested disruption. That was part of what made it quiet when she was gone. I am not here as a visitor. I am here because I was once. Because I stood in this same square of floor and told myself we had enough. Because I closed a folder and labeled it complete. The word still irritates me. The air smells faintly of old paper and cleaning solution that no longer works. The building changed hands twice. No one thought to repaint this unit. It was cheaper to leave it empty. I move slowly, careful not to disturb the outline of the past. Evidence doesn't vanish. It only learns patience. In 1996, I was new enough to believe timelines behaved, that if you followed them in order, answers would appear at the end. Lila's schedule was consistent: classes in the morning, work in the evenings, a short walk home. Neighbors remembered her shoes before her face, always sensible, always clean. She returned a library book the afternoon before she disappeared. The stamp is still clear, due date met. That detail mattered to me then. It still does. I kneel where a small table used to sit. There is a faint mark on the floor, a square of darker wood. Something heavy stood there for a long time, a lamp maybe. The original report lists personal items accounted for. It was true. Her wallet was found, her keys, her bag folded neatly by the door. Neatness confused us. It suggested intention or trust. A photograph lies on the floor now, recently dropped. Not from 1996. Someone else's mistake. I pick it up and slide it back into the file box near the wall. The box wasn't here before. That's new. Cardboard labeled in blue marker, Unit 3B MISC. Someone archived the wrong things together. That happens when time dulls context. I open my own file. The paper has yellowed unevenly. The first page is my handwriting, younger, firmer, less patient. Last confirmed sighting, 8:42 p.m. that came from a bus driver who remembered her smile, not her name. He wasn't sure at first. He became sure later. Certainty grows when it's asked for. There was no sign of forced entry, no clear disturbance. That sentence appears in 3 separate sections of the report, phrased differently each time as if repetition might give it weight. We searched nearby lots. We spoke to classmates. We traced phone calls made from her line. 2 short conversations that night, one with her mother. 1 unanswered ring to a number that no longer exists. The sound of paper turning is loud in the empty room. I pause, listening to it settle. This place magnifies small noises. It always did. I step into the kitchen. The sink is dry. The counter still bears a faint ring from a mug. Lila favored chamomile. She wrote that in a notebook we found later among class notes and clipped articles about sleep. Helps the quiet, she wrote. I think about that now, about how some people chase quiet while others leave it behind. Back then we cataloged everything. We measured. We photographed. We spoke carefully as if precision could substitute for understanding. I remember standing by this window, looking out at the streetlight, thinking the light was too harsh for such a calm neighborhood. It felt accusatory. That was projection. The light was doing its job. A neighbor had heard voices that night, not loud, not urgent, just a conversation that paused, resumed, no clear words. The report calls it unremarkable. That word does more damage than it admits. Unremarkable things build patterns. We missed that. I sit on the edge of the counter and read the statements again. The friend from class, the supervisor from work, the man who lived downstairs and borrowed her newspaper, each memory small, each incomplete. No one argued, no one rushed, nothing that could be framed as decisive. That absence shaped our conclusion. The case went quiet, not closed, quiet. There is a difference we tell ourselves matters. Years later, the system updated, files digitized, a clerk flagged inconsistencies, minor, dates that didn't align, times rounded differently by different hands. It was enough to bring me back. I move back into the main room. The ceiling fan is gone, but the shadow of its blades remains. I imagine it turning slowly, pushing warm air in circles that never reached the corners. Lila's desk was here. We found a photo tucked into a book. Her and another woman older standing by a river. The caption on the back read, "Before everything changed." We never asked what that meant. We assumed it was sentimental. Assumptions age poorly. I flipped to a page marked with a red tab. New edition, 2024. A transcript. A routine audit uncovered a misfiled utility record. Power usage in this unit spiked briefly the night after Lila disappeared. Not enough to alarm anyone, enough to be recorded. The timing didn't match her habits. She conserved. She tracked expenses in a ledger that ended abruptly mid-page. That ledger is in evidence now again. I run my thumb over the indentation where her pen pressed too hard. The last line lists a name, not a bill, a person. Initials at first, then a full name written once carefully as if practicing. I didn't notice it then, or I noticed and dismissed it as unrelated. The mind is efficient at protecting itself. There is a statement attached, taken years later, a maintenance worker. He remembered being asked to check a fuse box in this building that week. He remembered because the request came from someone who didn't live here. He couldn't recall the face, just the voice. Calm, polite. He fixed the issue, or thought he did. The room feels smaller now, not because it changed, but because the space between details has narrowed. This is how it happens, not with revelations, but with alignment. I stand and walk the perimeter, counting steps. I stop where the floor mark darkens. I imagine the weight that rested there. I imagine hands moving something aside. Not hurried, deliberate. Trust makes people unguarded. That isn't a flaw, it's a condition. I write a note in the margin. Sequence matters. It always did. We just didn't know which sequence. Outside, a car passes. The sound is distant, softened by glass. I think about how many times that sound passed unnoticed while this room waited. I think about the mechanical nature of progress, how systems respond when prompted, not when they should. There is more here now than there was before. Not more truth, more structure. The difference is subtle. It is enough to reopen what was set aside, enough to ask questions that were once inconvenient. I close the file and sit with the silence. It doesn't resist. It never has. It simply holds what it was given. Somewhere in the accumulation of small, careful facts, something essential has shifted. Not dramatically, precisely. This is where it begins again. I return the file to the box but leave it unsealed. The difference matters. Open means active. Open means accountable. In 1996, we believed closure was an action, not a decision. Now I understand it is mostly a choice made under pressure. The hallway outside the unit smells faintly of paint and age. Someone tried to improve it once. The attempt didn't last. Improvement rarely does without maintenance. Back at the office, the lights hum with the same tone they always have. Desks rearranged, faces changed. The systems remained. I signed the case back out under my name. That also matters. Ownership clarifies intent. The clerk does not ask why. He rarely does. He slides the folder across and waits for my signature to dry. The first step is not interrogation. It is alignment. I spread the materials across the table and remove the years between them. Dates lose authority when you stop respecting them. I place the utility record next to the ledger. I place the maintenance log beside the neighbor statement. The shapes begin to resemble one another. Not identical, compatible. The initials in the ledger appear again in a phone record. A local number active briefly that year, registered to a shell address. Nothing unusual except the timing. Calls clustered around late evenings, short durations. One unanswered call the night Lila did not return. We marked it as coincidence then. Coincidence is efficient. It saves time. I request archived employment files from the medical office where she worked. Most are gone. One remains misfiled. A temporary hire roster from that spring. A name repeats across several weeks, then vanishes. The handwriting on the roster matches the pressure pattern in Lila's ledger. That is not proof. It is context. I drive back to the neighborhood the next morning. The light is harsher in daylight. The street looks smaller, less forgiving. People move through routines without noticing the past layered beneath them. I knock on the door downstairs. A different tenant answers. Younger, polite. I ask about the building. He shrugs. Buildings are containers, not stories to most people. The former neighbor moved years ago. I track her through records that resist being found. She answers the phone with caution, then recognition. Her voice changes when I say the address. Memory is selective until it is. She repeats what she said before, voices, calm, pauses. Then she adds something new, a detail she didn't think mattered. The cadence changed once, as if someone else joined, not louder, more precise. I write that down. Precision alters dynamics. Precision demands response. At the archive, I find a photograph I do not remember taking. It was filed under exterior shots. The angle is wrong. It captures a reflection in the window glass. A figure across the street, partially obscured. We didn't enhance images then. We didn't expect them to give back more than we put in. The reflection aligns with a timestamp from the utility spike. The figure stands where the light breaks unevenly. I send the image for processing. The result is limited but clarifying. The outline suggests familiarity with the space, not a visitor, someone who knew when lights came on when they did not. I interview the maintenance worker again. Time has thinned his memory but not erased it. He recalls the voice more clearly now. He says it was educated, measured. He assumed authority without asserting it. People respond to that. He did. The employment file yields a home address. It is empty now, sold twice. I walk the perimeter and note the distances. Bus line, convenience store, medical office. The routes overlap. Overlap is opportunity. I request permission to review archived academic records. Lila switched a course that semester. The reason listed is scheduling conflict. The instructor she switched from appears on the same temporary hire roster. That connection was buried under normality. Normality is effective camouflage. I sit with the realization longer than I need to. It does not announce itself. It waits until you are ready to see it. The twist is not dramatic, it is structural. We assumed disruption came from outside her routine. It did not. It came from within it. I speak to the instructor's former colleagues. They describe him with neutral language. reliable, exact, brief. One mentions he disliked improvisation. Another recalls his interest in systems, not people, systems. The arrest does not feel like resolution. It feels procedural. He listens as the evidence is presented. He does not interrupt. His silence is consistent with everything else. When he speaks, it is to correct a date. Accuracy matters to him. It always did. The community responds as communities do, with surprise calibrated to distance, shock framed by relief. The language is familiar. I avoid it. I focus on sequence, on how small choices accumulated without resistance. I return to the unit one last time. The box is still there. I seal it now. Not because everything is answered, but because the questions have been properly ordered. Justice processes. It does not feel. As I leave, the room remains unchanged. It does not thank me. It does not accuse me. It simply holds what it was given. That is what remains. The paperwork completes itself once momentum takes over. Forms move from one tray to another. Dates receive stamps. Signatures align where they are expected. The system accepts the case back into circulation without comment. That is its role. It does not ask how long something waited. It only confirms that it has been received. I watch the process from a distance that feels intentional, close enough to intervene, far enough to avoid interpretation. The name on the documents now sits beside official language: charged, processed, scheduled. The words are neutral, almost gentle in their efficiency. They do not reflect the years they represent. They never do. I think about Lila in the weeks before she vanished from routine, how she adjusted schedules to accommodate someone else's expectations, how she wrote a name in her ledger as if rehearsing its permanence, how trust can be a quiet agreement made without witnesses. None of that appears in the record. It does not translate well into procedure. The instructor does not resist the sequence as it unfolds. He answers when required. He pauses when silence is advantageous. He corrects small inaccuracies with precision that feels reflexive. He never asks why now. That question would imply surprise. Surprise would require miscalculation. I do not see miscalculation in him. I see recalibration. During the hearing, I sit behind the glass and listen to the cadence of the room, the measured pace of voices, the regulated intervals, the language of certainty applied to fragments. This is where stories are reduced to components, where context is trimmed until it fits accepted frames. It is not unkind. It is efficient. There is a moment when Lila's name is read aloud. It lands differently than the rest, not because of emotion, because it does not belong to this setting. Names like hers exist before documentation. Afterward, they function as references. I write that down and then cross it out. Some observations are not actionable. Outside, the day continues without adjustment. People pass with conversations that do not pause. Traffic moves according to patterns that do not account for resolution. I stand on the steps longer than necessary and let that register. Closure is not communal. It is administrative. A reporter asks a question framed around outcome. I respond with process. That exchange satisfies neither of us, which makes it accurate. The word solved is used later. It will travel further than it should. Words like that imply an end state. This does not feel like one. I return to the office and place the file in its final position. The shelf is marked with dates that overlap. Cases lean against one another for support. I slide it in and step back. From this distance, it resembles the others. Uniform, complete. That is the illusion order provides. There are items that remain unfiled. Notes written for clarity rather than record. Observations about timing that do not meet criteria. the sensation that something was recognized too late to alter the trajectory that followed. These are not omissions. They are excess. The system has no category for them. In the weeks that follow, messages arrive from people who want to understand what they missed. They ask how something so ordinary contained a fault line. I answer with structure, with patterns, with the reassurance that nothing obvious was ignored. That reassurance is partially true. Obviousness is retrospective. I revisit the ledger one final time before it is archived beyond casual reach. The indentation on the page remains. Pressure leaves evidence even when ink fades. I run my fingers along the line where the name appears, not the letters, the force behind them, the moment of decision. That moment does not appear elsewhere. It does not need to. The unit is cleared for renovation. The mark on the floor will be sanded away, the walls repainted. A different arrangement will occupy the space. That does not trouble me. Places are not responsible for what passes through them. They only record. I stand in the doorway before it closes for the last time. The air is neutral now, the dust disturbed and resettled, the silence adjusted to absence. I consider the idea that resolution is something applied after the fact to make endurance tolerable. It is not an ending. It is a pause sanctioned by authority. As I leave, I do not look back. That is not a statement. It is habit. Forward motion is easier when you accept that comprehension has limits. Justice will continue to function as designed. Mechanisms will turn. Outcomes will be documented. Somewhere between the file and the memory, something remains unaccounted for, not missing, simply untranslatable. It will persist outside language, outside process. That is not a failure. It is a reminder that the human element does not conclude when the paperwork does. The case leaves my desk quietly. No ceremony, no signal. One day it is present, demanding alignment and reconsideration. The next, it has been absorbed into the larger body of resolved matters, indistinguishable unless someone is trained to see the seams. That transition is deliberate. It prevents fixation. It allows the system to continue functioning without hesitation. I remain aware of it longer than necessary. That awareness does not interfere with work. It simply exists alongside it, like a low-frequency sound that never fully dissipates. I have learned not to interpret that as unfinished business. It is something else, a residue of proximity. In the months following the arrest, I receive fewer questions. Public attention thins as new narratives replace old ones. The community adjusts its language. Shock becomes acceptance. Acceptance becomes anecdote. Eventually, the event is referenced without specificity, reduced to a year and a headline. This is not indifference. It is adaptation. People require distance to remain functional. The instructor enters the process as expected. Motions filed, dates set. Proceedings unfold with mechanical consistency. I attend none of them. My role ended when sequence aligned with evidence. Presence beyond that would imply investment. Investment clouds assessment. The distinction matters. I do, however, review transcripts when they become available. Not for content, for tone. Tone reveals more than testimony. His remains unchanged, precise, corrective, focused on alignment rather than implication. He addresses questions directly and avoids extrapolation. This is not strategy, it is disposition. Lila's name appears repeatedly in those transcripts, attached to formal language that describes her in fragments. Age, occupation, location. The reduction is necessary for procedure. It is also incomplete. Both statements are true simultaneously. I think back to the photograph by the river, the one we did not contextualize at the time. The woman beside her remains unidentified. That uncertainty persists. It does not obstruct understanding of what occurred. It simply reminds me that no record is comprehensive. Every file omits something essential by design. The ledger is transferred to long-term storage. Access requires justification now. That barrier is appropriate. Evidence should not be revisited without cause. I file my final note alongside it, concise and procedural. No commentary, no reflection. Those belong elsewhere. There are moments later when similar cases cross my desk. Different names, different years, familiar structures. I do not compare them consciously. Comparison introduces bias. Still, recognition operates without permission. Patterns echo, they always do. I am asked once informally whether it felt different to resolve something after so much time. The question is framed casually as if curiosity alone prompted it. I answer truthfully. It felt accurate. Accuracy is not satisfying. It is sufficient. Accuracy does not restore what routine absorbed. It does not compensate for the years that continued uninterrupted elsewhere. It does not adjust the internal calculations people make when trusting systems. It simply places events where they belong relative to one another. On a quiet afternoon, I revisit the street where the unit once stood. Renovation is complete. New siding, updated windows. The exterior suggests renewal. That suggestion is cosmetic but not false. The building serves its purpose again. That is enough. I stand across the street and observe without entering. There is nothing to retrieve. The space no longer corresponds to memory. That separation is important. It allows recollection to remain internal, unchallenged by altered physical context. I notice a bus stop nearby. Different sign, same route. People wait without urgency, trusting arrival schedules that fluctuate slightly but reliably. Lila once stood there adjusting her bag, scanning for familiar faces. That image surfaces briefly, uninvited. I allow it, then let it pass. The investigation did not fail originally because of negligence. It failed because of assumptions embedded in structure. Structure relies on probability. Probability does not account for deviation that mimics normality too closely. That lesson is neither new nor easily applied. I write a memorandum later, unrelated to the case, addressing review thresholds for routine adjacencies. It is general enough to be accepted, specific enough to be useful. That is how institutional memory functions when it works. Years from now, someone may read that memorandum without knowing its origin. That anonymity is appropriate. Improvements should not require attribution to loss. They should exist independently. I receive a brief notification when sentencing concludes. The terms are consistent with guidelines. No deviation. No commentary. I acknowledge receipt and archive the notice. The system marks the case complete. Completion is an administrative state. It does not correspond to closure as it is commonly understood. Closure implies an emotional endpoint. Administration recognizes only procedural endpoints. That distinction prevents confusion. I consider whether anything remains unresolved. Not legally, not evidentially. What remains exists outside categories that invite response. It is the understanding that precision does not equal intimacy. That proximity to truth does not guarantee comprehension. The weight of guilt I once associated with this case has dissipated, not because it was absolved, but because it was examined accurately. Guilt often arises from ambiguity rather than responsibility. Clarifying sequence clarifies emotion. Still, something human persists beyond clarification. It does not demand action. It does not disrupt routine. It simply resists translation. That resistance is not an obstacle. It is a boundary. As I return to daily work, files continue to accumulate. Each carries its own internal logic waiting to be recognized. I approach them with the same restraint I always have: measured, attentive, aware of limits. Justice, as practiced, remains mechanical. It operates through calibration and repetition. It improves incrementally, rarely retrospectively. That is its design. It cannot account for everything. It is not meant to. What remains after the mechanisms conclude is quieter. It does not announce itself. It does not seek validation. It stays with those who were close enough to observe without intervening, to understand without altering outcome. That remainder does not interfere with function. It coexists. It reminds without instructing. It acknowledges that even when sequence is restored and responsibility assigned, something essential remains beyond reach. I accept that, not as resignation but as recognition. The work continues regardless. The system requires participation, not certainty, precision over comfort, accuracy over resolution. Somewhere between record and memory, between procedure and presence, Lila exists as more than a case and less than a story. That space cannot be closed. It does not need to be. The file is complete, the process concluded, the mechanism satisfied. What remains is human.